Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast where us two weirdos figure out what we think about everything in the entire universe. My name is your host, one of your hosts, Michael Forrest.
My name is Ivanka Majic.
I am in love with this YouTube channel, The Craftsman, Steady Crafting. It's like this ASMR. He does like plastic molding and he does all these things, but he's got this wonderful way of talking and he introduces himself. My name is your host, The Craftsman. He sort of uses a puppet, but then you see his real hands with black gloves on them. It's strange. That is, I'll just write that in the links. Craftsman, crafts. Right. This week on the podcast, on the Rambly podcast, we're going to talk about... Hold on to your hats. And look, it's not what you think. It is a little bit what you think, but it's not what you think. We're going to talk about, I mean, you may have seen the title, sovereignty. Which emerged for me from thinking about sovereignty over my time, and a good book that I've just been reading called 4,000 Weeks, about how we've basically got about 4,000 weeks on this planet. And our relationship with time, and just thinking about how I do have the goods and bads of having total sovereignty over your time. And then obviously we're going to talk about why it's such a persuasive argument for shooting yourself in the foot as a nation.
No bias here at all.
No bias.
A lot of strong opinions.
Have you got any subjects you're thinking we could cover here?
The sovereignty, how it balances with community, and how can you truly be sovereign, and what is that? Also, how to spell it.
That I literally had to double check because it's a tricky one.
What an annoying one to spell.
Sovereignty, and it means a king, right? It means like a ruler. Anyway, we're literally.
I mean, on the grounds of its spelling alone, I'd like to dismiss the concept. It's a silly word.
Me too. One sovereign. That's a currency, isn't it, as well? What was I going to say? Sovereignty. Yeah, we don't usually do this on the podcast, but I'm just literally going to look it up in a dictionary as well, because I don't think anyone really knows what it's supposed to mean. So with that said, let's fade up this music, and I'm going to go like this. Okay. I'm trying to keep the podcast being sensible. I still have not figured out this software, how to do all the transitions that I used to do in OBS and Ecamm Live. But now I have a code. If you want to get Ecamm Live, get it through my code because I get money. Sorry, nice. Ivanka. We're trying up a different format this week, which is, what is the best thing that happened to you last week, or that happened? What's the best story you got from last week? How do we
best story?
This?
Yeah. As a continuity to the last episode, I had my Stitch and Bitch, or Ispleti Parezzi.
Ispleti Parezzi.
Ispleti Parezzi. Which is, I can't remember if I explained the play on words that it is. But it was a success. Okay. It was a success. It made me feel very happy, and I was right buzzing off it afterwards, let me tell you, for a couple of days at least.
Wow.
So that was very good. I promoted it in a... they reminded me today that today there is an event in the park, literally as we speak, for the kids of the village. And if I'd have known maybe on Monday, I may perhaps have been able to rearrange my morning. But given that, the late notice, they're very good at late notice. But I started promoting it at least 10 days in advance of the event. Did Facebook group, did a Facebook event, did flyers, kept sending them to people that I could think of that knew people, talking to people in the park. Hello, yeah, I'm doing this thing on Saturday. Do you want to come? Like, really went to town. Of course, I did not have 500 people turn up, but we did have a surprising mix of people that I don't know as well. Surprising mix of people that couldn't actually knit and had come to be taught to knit. So that was nice. I found myself teaching people to knit, which I've never done. And I was a bit like, oh, what? But I did it. I was glad I'd taken spare wool and needles and crochet stuff. So it was a beautiful day, lovely weather. The kids all ran around and played. We had a couple of dogs as well. They ran around and played. Lots of people stopped by, like older ladies in the village, like, oh, what's this going on? And then they'd like help people knit a bit and then they'd walk away. So we told them that we'd be there again. It was a really happy, positive thing that everyone was buzzing off. And then the local tourist board shared the pictures.
Wow.
Because I did hey, thanks everybody for coming. It was amazing. Usual, actual kind of marketing, they call it.
Check you out, making genuine local change, having a genuine impact.
It was just glorious.
So how many people, sorry?
I don't know, maybe in total, knitters probably 12, and then plus children and then the passers-by, the people that had sort of knew it was happening and came and looked from a distance, So it was the lurkers. But yeah, it was just really, and like one lady came who, for example, she's quite recently widowed, but not very old at all. She just needs stuff to do. And she was just so happy to come. You could tell that she was just, not in a sort of miserable way, but just like, brilliant, there's a thing I can do. I'm going to do it. So that was nice. So yeah, I was very pleased with that.
That's splendid. Yeah. And was it the conversations? Did it? It didn't get like. Were you able to shoehorn any environmentalism into there?
Well,
or was it not like that?
It wasn't really like that. It was more like sitting around talking. It was very much, it gives you this focus because people are doing something with their hands. They're not looking at each other. It's a less intense way of talking to people.
Right. Yeah.
So we were, but then like a daughter of one of them, because I let her take some knitting and some wool home, and then her teenage daughter grabbed hold of it, so she's coming next time. So then I've looked up some patterns for things like making yourself a little bag for your mobile phone and stuff like that. So I think it's about making things and being out and that's community. And so great. I was really pleased.
Please, so we're doing, give me the link with the pictures as well, so that I can
I will.
Those
Yes.
I'll put those
we
in the
didn't have a. We're not this week Saturday. I made a WhatsApp group for everybody afterwards for people who were genuinely properly wanted to be included, because not everyone's on on Facebook either. But they, this Saturday, rather than I'm promoting one for the following Saturday. But I told the little WhatsApp group, I was like, look, if it's a nice day, I'll be on the bridge again. On Saturday afternoon, same time, if anyone wants to come. So a few people want to do that anyway. But so it has this like big push promote and little gangs starting to form. So let's see. Got to keep it up though. But I was very happy. So that's my good story of the week. What's your good story?
My good story of the week. It's not so much a story. I'm going to save my bit of my civic contribution for. I'm going to shoehorn that into the main conversation, and just say I basically finished a sort of. Probably about a 2-month project that I've been working on yesterday. Released a video, which I'm pretty proud of, and it's silly and it's nerdy and it's fun. It's talking to this DJ. You can see it at squares.tv/DJ Dakeyne, Dakeyne. And just talk to this guy Paul about how he plugs everything into other things and has a fun party, makes a party, and like it's good. And if Twitch viewers can, you should. This is what we do on like Friday at 5:00 UK time. We usually I'm back home by like 5:30 usually on Friday, and when I'm sort of chopping up vegetables and things, we've got the home party in the kitchen and we've got his live stream on there, and there's all the emotes, and it's a little party every Friday, and it just helps ushering in the weekend. But he has some really good production values, and I managed to. We had a really good hour-long conversation, which I somehow, through some feat of Herculean feat, managed to focus into 10 minutes, and also releases so there's also a podcast version of it, which is the hour. Edited a little bit, but there was a lot of technical challenges to getting that edit, doing the edit. There was a lot of technical, coming up with what the focus was going to be, challenges, and then I wanted to knit it into something that people would then want to click on afterwards. So I made this interactive rig explorer, I'm calling it. So you it shows how everything's plugged into other things, and you can click through and see what each thing is, and each thing has a link to the bit of hardware or whatever it is, and it all sort of stems from me shilling my app as well. But yeah, so I was very proud of myself for releasing that, and actually the fact that I know I can I've already ordered my next transformer from eBay as a reward.
Very good.
Which hopefully I can show next week or the week after. But it does take the edge off the waiting for the first comments to come in. Like when you do finish something, waiting to see if the numbers are going to be anything. But the numbers are looking really good so far, and the comments have been great. Like everyone's been like, "This is brilliant." So yeah, please come and have a look at that at squares.tv/DJ Decane. So,
marvellous.
There we go.
Let's
segue in. Let's have a little break. I've renamed my video clips to Break 1 so that I remember to call them a break. Let's have a little break and then we can start talking about this mucky subject of sovereignty. So, sovereignty.
Just gone to the Wikipedia page.
Oh, Wikipedia. I'm just on the Google thing. Supreme power or authority. The authority of a state to govern itself or another state, and a self-governing state. Okay. What are you seeing on Wikipedia?
I'm seeing this page has got some problems, it says. This article has multiple issues. Nothing to do with the actual concept of sovereignty itself. Sovereignty is a supreme authority within a territory.
Right.
Sovereignty entails hierarchy within the state as well as external autonomy for states. And then I scanned earlier after you suggested the topic, and it I think it comes from there's a bit of history of it. And in medieval times, medieval monarchs were not sovereign, at least not strongly so, because they were constrained by and shared power with their feudal aristocracy.
Lords, feudal aristocracy.
So even though you might have been a king, you weren't necessarily king of the world, or you still had to listen to the bigger king.
And I think the first weird thing about this whole idea is that there is some concept of a state, or that someone can just go, "This is all mine now." Yeah. Like we've just arbitrarily draw. It's like on an island, it's one thing, but even that is pretty arbitrary. But once you get into Europe or something, it's like, oh no, this is my bit now, and I am sovereign. And you sort of get this ruler that is supposed to be, or set of. Well, the feudal lords are doing it, aren't they? They're going, this area is. They're just claiming some land and drawing a boundary around it and saying this is all mine. And before that, people were doing that. It was just land, and then someone goes, no, I own this now. And now I get to decide what to do with it, and that's like a problematic thing before you even get into anything else. And
it is.
Interview. This is going well.
No, sorry. I was like, the land thing. This idea of owning land is a very. So here on this island on which I live, right, there are families that are not speaking to each other because of, a 2 centimeter boundary that is in, there's there is a very possessive attitude towards small amounts of land, and that doesn't mean anything. There's no ruling. There's no. Yeah, my levels are going up and down, and I don't know why. I don't know what's driving them. There you go. So apologies for any weird. I don't know what's making.
We'll see what happens. We'll just keep
what happens. But they are here, so they'll fight over the smallest amount of land, and I just don't really have that attitude, and I don't know why. if you contrast it to other, like we talk about the Native Americans, for example, they or First Nation cultures, they have this whole attitude of protecting land for future generations. It's not owning. I don't own this. I'm just its keeper for right now. But when you were talking about sovereignty as a concept before, I hadn't really associated it with physical land.
Right.
I thought about it more from a decision making and power point of view.
Yeah. And I'm thinking like that. I mean, there's obvious advantages to saying, okay, we're one nation. We're a nation. We're in this together. Let's all kind of put our money into the pot, and then we'll have roads that everyone can use, and we'll have infrastructure that everyone can use. And on that level, it seems like a sensible idea to sort of for not everyone to just be out on their own. And that really is the that's the strange thing. It's like, but it is an artificial boundary at the end of the day, because and when I think about it, like it's why can't we be a sovereign nation of like sovereign Europe and all in it together as Europe? Why has the UK suddenly gone, oh no, it's the sovereignty at the level of the country is more important than Europe, but also like localized stuff might actually be more,
isn't it? It's like if it's just about making decisions and it's on the level of Britain, then you have less influence. You've got all the power but for a defined space, whereas if you're going for collaboration or influence rather than it will be as I say, you have the potential for a much wider reach without actually having to fight anybody for 3 centimeters of wall space.
And instead of giving like maybe it's a bit faster but let's just go straight into tying this into the sort of personal sovereignty idea as well, because I think it all kind of meets the same thing. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this subject was something that there's something that I've definitely been doing, and I think a lot of people are doing more and more, which is trying to regain control over their time and basically have sovereignty over what I do with my time. And having now had total sovereignty over all of my time for over 2 years, I will say that but the book that I just read, this 4,000 Weeks book, like the thing that there's the other part of it. It's no good just having vast swathes of time that you have total control of if you're not in sync with other people's time that they have sovereignty over. So if you're the only person that has sovereignty, then you're out on your own. And that's exactly the same thing with kind of detaching yourself from a larger, agglomeration of different states and going, oh no, I just want to be on my own, so I've got more control. But now you're not in sync with those people. And then with stories of things like, digital nomads who can sort of travel the world and see all these amazing sites, but they're doing it alone because they've got their own sovereignty, but it's not in sync with anyone else's. And how like Stalin instituted this 4-day staggered work week back in the 30s, I think, in Russia. But what it meant was there were 5 sort of cohorts of people, and so that they could keep the factories and stuff running all the time. So everyone's like day off was a different day depending on what like color you were assigned. And sometimes, and they were supposed to put like couples in the same group, but they weren't always in there. And it just had this total like destructive effect on relationships because no one had the same day off. And there's this Swedish study of like there was a relationship between antidepressant prescriptions and like working hours kind of thing. But basically, like, does work make you happy? And it was sort of like when people weren't at work, they were happier. But the more people that weren't working, so in the summer, the more people that were off work, the more happy everyone was. And it's like, it's not just a relationship of whether you have your own personal freedom, it's how in sync that is with everyone else. And so if everyone has the same weekend and everyone has to has Sunday, no one's allowed to. And he talks about this sort of Jewish thing, like how much you have to protect the Sabbath day with like all these weird rules about you can't turn on a light switch and things like that, because that's how hard it is for us not to work, how hard it is for us to stop working. And to have everyone sort of synchronized on that same day has these great sort of social benefits. But it's a different thing to sovereignty. So if you're just sovereign over your kind of existence, but like not in sync with anyone else, our best relationships are often formed by people we worked with, because we sort of had that synchronization forced on us. And if we're out separate, it's kind of, you have to remember that that's an important thing in order to sort of make it happen.
Why sovereignty? How different, for two things that's making me think, how is sovereignty different from dictatorship? And why is one positive? Why is sovereignty deemed to be a positive, like an aspirational word, like, or at least that's in the current climate? Yeah. And dictatorship is a negative word. Is it just because it's not a single person necessarily? Like why are they different? Like,
I find giving sovereignty to like a conservative government is just like so much worse than like them having to answer to like some people that are actually trying to put human rights on the table. But I think it's who it is. It's this belief that it's a democratic sovereignty, that it's that we're all sovereign somehow. Like, we have this group sovereignty.
Why are we? So, like, I find it such an odd thing. So, really, if you sort of, take it to the ridiculous, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, they are a sovereign nation, and they can make women not go to school and cover their faces and all this kind of stuff. Like, that's an extreme. Why, we don't want that. We're not lifting everybody up. We don't want a state, because sovereignty because as is happening in the UK now, the sovereign power is not helping the majority of people.
Yeah. So it comes back to the question, which is, sovereignty in itself doesn't mean anything if you don't know who is at the top of that, who is in charge of the sovereigns. So
it leads to control, doesn't it?
Right.
Or it comes from a need to, or a desire to, or a wish to control.
It's the idea that control equals better.
Good.
Taking back control. There we go. Yeah. Let's have a little break and just have a think. So, it comes to this idea of control. The stream quality has been lowered due to network conditions. That's not good, is it? I thought my network was good here. What is the why is control? Control is very important to us, and not feeling in control is damaging. Like, it's very hard to feel good about your life when you have no control over anything, and a lot of the time you overcome a feeling of. Well, I saw, again, a craftsman, he did a little video on stress, and it was like, you can't control the external forces that's causing the stress, but you can control your breathing. So you focus on the thing you can control, and that feeling of having something under your control is very reassuring to people, and it's very unpleasant to feel like you have no control. But it does come back, it does come back to that, but you're just giving control to some people. You're just giving more agency to people who are going to abuse that control, unfortunately, when it comes to this country.
I mean, it seems like a sovereignty. I mean, are they positive? Like, if you take it to the unit of family, and you want to be able to make decisions inside your own family, unless your decisions are to be abusive towards each other, in which case that sovereignty, we don't allow that level of sovereignty in law. If I'm maybe using the word incorrectly.
Well, no, I think
I'm trying to play with it.
But yeah, it's like you think about like the Geneva Convention or something. Like we can be sovereign, but there is still war crimes. There is still the police like outside your home that if you really do like break that social contract. But, remembering that the world is not a democracy, it is anarchy. Each different country is sort of doing its own thing, and it's quite hard to kind of like run a planet that way, isn't it? Like when it is, like we forget, we think everything's democracy, but it is actually anarchy, and whoever's got the biggest weapons is probably going to get to do what they want. Unless we just all kind of swallow our pride and go, no, okay, let's have an agreement to maybe not blow up the planet or, ruin everything.
But it's the same with like sovereignty, like going back to that sort of Wikipedia and the definitions, it's very much attached to territory. But like just because a portion of river flows through your territory, or you have access to a portion of sea or soil, like you don't stop nature moving. Nature doesn't understand that it's supposed to keep those toxins. Oh no, that those belong to Ivanka's garden. Those toxins, they must stay in Ivanka's garden. Sorry, didn't realise. It just doesn't work.
Nature doesn't respect the boundaries. Some of these
and
you can try and put up a wall with Mexico. Like that's not how it works. Like, these things are porous. No.
Like so it's like, and any attempt where in Australia where they've put up fences to protect against certain wildlife or keep people out, it's just created massive imbalances. So they have like population explosions of kangaroos because they've put up a fence that stopped the natural predators. I'm not sure kangaroos, and this is the right example because I don't know what a natural predator of kangaroo is. Beside the point. The point is, if you try and control Earth, does it really work?
Yeah, we've got this like hubris that we're like a delusion of control, essentially. Like you can have a certain amount of control, but if you believe you're in control of things that you can't possibly control, which is the sort of hubris of the oil company, and it's like you're doing pretty well at controlling things, but you're sort of in denial about the fact that this is on borrowed time. You're living on borrowed time, and it's sort of like a sort of scrabbling at the end of the day to kind of like use the control while you've still got it, which leads to sort of short-termist ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a weird. I mean, it's not a thing I value, but I don't know if it's like I don't know how different some of it is if philosophically from a degree of not, I don't know, I was going to say libertarian type thinking where, you can do whatever you want in the confines of your own house, or you can do whatever you want but I still think that we're going, you can't, I'm still on that whole, you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't have impact on other people. And very few things that you do truly have no impact on other people. Even from like like you're saying, your digital nomadry means that you're not in sync with your friends. There's, which may not have a terrible impact on them if you're not a particularly a good contribution to their group, but you might be making their group smaller. It's impossible not to affect other people.
I think some people, like a lot of the populism comes from people feeling like they're unfairly being like limited in what they can do because they're so separated from those real impacts that those things are happening. It's like it's like, well, I'm doing my recycling, I'm doing this, why do I have to deal with someone, someone's telling me someone's come to take my jobs? That's just a step too far, kind of thing. Sorry, that was a muddled point. And just saying okay there's a boundary here doesn't change the fact that the trucks are all still going to have to come through, and you're still were still dependent on sort of foreign labour, and you were like, just because you say there's a boundary there doesn't make it so. And then you just see the effects of trying to impose some artificial boundary. Are just, I don't know, yeah, we're just coming sort of circling around the same point, but now instead of gardens growing into each other and kangaroos, it's like, you know, trucks and truck stops at, you know, Dover and all that kind of thing, like just trucks backed up, lorries. So you can just pretend, you can just try and pretend that you're in control of something, but there are, the natural flow of things is not the same way that we think. The stories that we tell, it's basically a story that we're telling ourselves.
I think sovereignty, yeah, it is a story,
yeah. And that's maybe. Sorry, I was just going to say maybe that's the story idea can be the next segment, and I can just say that the natural predator of the kangaroo is the dingo, the wedge-tailed eagle, and the human.
The human.
That was a little. My dad took some footage in Wales of some people writing their names in stones. Interesting. So yeah, it comes down to a story, doesn't it?
A story we tell ourselves. But I think this sovereignty story is out of date. Like, it's old fashioned. It belongs in a different. It belongs in fairy tales where kings are benevolent, and, you know, being a poor maiden needing to be rescued from a dragon is a cool story. It's like it's totally it's a sort of maybe romantic idea of control equals protected, equals safe, equals some things that maybe make it sound nice, when, you know, the reality is that with progress, lots of things are spinning out of control. So we've progressed in so many. We've got so good at making so many things so quickly, and buying so many things, and learning so many things, and having so many. There's just too much to control, and, you know, a small. So never mind the nature part of it and the things crossing fences and walls, but the world we have progressed to, it just doesn't lend itself to sovereignty. It's too complex. All the stuff is too complex,
and that's sort of like it, to sort of maybe like say that in a different way. It's just a massive oversimplification of reality. Like, it's so that you can stop thinking about it. Oh, well, once we've got sovereignty, then everything will be under control again. But that's because it's easier to think about things in those terms than to realise that it's a hugely complex system. And it used to be, and they're sort of like focusing in on, it's like, what makes it complicated is all the connections, and there used to be a small number of connections between like a town and a country even, and then they started putting in telegraphs and telephone lines, and now the number of connections is absolutely impossible to even conceive. And so to try and sort of think, oh, we'll just like interrupt this connection or this connection or this connection or this connection, is like, you're still, it just doesn't work anymore. And to migrate, to evolve your thinking into thinking, understanding that this is a system, and something small over here affects something over here, the butterfly wings, blah blah blah. People don't like that. They're scared of that story because it's like, it doesn't fit in your brain anymore. Like,
but I think maybe, because, you know, in many ways, all these connections are part of the problem. They're making us think that it's cool to eat an avocado in Brighton in I don't know when avocados actually ripe, but you know, it's impossible for them to not be traveling, those avocados, for example. And it's made, all of those connections made us think that you can literally decide what you want to cook, then go to the shop and find those ingredients whenever you want them, regardless of season, regardless of anything. And so I think people are perhaps confusing sovereignty with just being a bit more local. I mean, if you have this sort of like, you know, going back to my knitting story, I was looking for a Croatian wool producer. Yeah. Right. So I thought, because, you know, these things, the wool I'm knitting with, I've literally bought from Wool and the Gang, and it's from Peru.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all, you know, local, blah, blah, in Peru. So I was like, there has to be a local somewhere. Someone's making wool. But I haven't found them yet, and I'll report back on that story. So you're like reeling some of your connections in and going, well, I mean, London, it's not cool to be knitting with, you know, I'm not sure. You know, Wool and the Gang has got very good credentials, blah, blah. But, you know, like looking for those local alternatives is good.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean, I think that is good and right, and you should be doing that. But that doesn't mean that you have to go, you know, have to sever the connections and not continue to collaborate and not continue to, you know what I mean? It's like sovereignty is like a negative way of doing local, I think.
But I think it's also a completely arbitrary and sort of overly general boundary to draw. It's like, okay, for everything to do with anything to do with immigration, trade, defense, I don't know, all those different things, we're suddenly going to draw the boundary around all of those things in one go because we're sort of used to this idea of a nation. Whereas if we could say, okay, these certain things are better done locally. Certain types of government you should be giving, you know, devolving power to those smaller things and focus on the interfaces between those more local things. And it's just how the internet works. Like you have a very small, simple unit and then a very clear protocol for how those things communicate. And that's really how we need to evolve in our thinking about all these things. What are the connections between these things? Not just what is the boundary around this thing. And then different types of things demand different boundaries. And if we could have like one boundary for like people and maybe a different boundary for certain types of goods that we happen to be good at producing, that we want to sort of foster a bit more of a local production and less of a carbon footprint for, you know, vehicle manufacturing or fruit, you know, farming and all those things, and say, look, we don't have to exclude immigration just to say, can we try and like encourage like local farming and like not do quite so much shipping around the planet. So it's the arbitrariness and the oversimplification of that boundary that I find most troubling about this whole thing.
I mean, going back to the whole Brexit, which is what's where the word sovereignty is like the idea that British farms are having to throw away food because there's nobody to pick it is unfathomable.
It's like, you know, you've made a mess of this. You got this wrong.
Wrong.
And if the idea is that with this sovereignty we'll be able to move faster and react quicker, like that's not happening, is it? They're just doubling down on like the horrible principles behind everything.
You see, I watched. It is kind of connected because I think it talks about, you know, the people that are being sucked in by sovereignty are the same people that are being screwed by the current sovereignty. And I saw this football. I think it was Gary Neville did a summary of the Tory conference and the sort of the removal of the emergency universal credit payment that they're just you know. Thanks. You don't need this money. And he's just gone like, I trust the public that nobody's sitting at home going, oh, I know what I'll do. I'm going to be really lazy and do nothing and just get this extra 20 quid a week off the state. And I saw this harrowing video of a man, a disabled man who's born with cerebral palsy, shouting at Jacob Rees-Mogg over. I saw it this week somewhere on YouTube. And it's like, you know, it's like, you've made it impossible for me to have a job. You've taken away my job. You know, and to get his payments, he had to prove that he had cerebral palsy. You know, like, but so there's all these that you know, that this sovereign, this is not, you're demanding sovereignty, or you've been sold the story of sovereignty because you think it will make you more protected and more safe. But you've given that sovereignty to people who just don't give
They do not care
about you. No, they just don't care about you.
They think that if you're poor, it's your fault. That's the problem. Like, they think that you're just not as good as us if you're not rich and don't talk posh. I'm going to shoehorn this in before we kind of finish, because we've got some stuff. Don't tune out when we do the end credits, because we've got a podcast, some news, an update. But I just want to say, like, I sort of did a sort of civic contribution this week, and I got quite excited about the idea. I don't know if it's panned out, but this idea of I cannot affect, like, the wider world, but this document came through, this Queen's Park area study of, like, here are the objectives, and like we've looked at all the properties and all the different types of shops and all the problems people are talking about, and they had this whole like 75-page document, and I did tweet this, and I will just pull up the tweet, and I just had a look through it, and they had this thing about like. I kind of homed in on the bit about, I was like, oh, cycle lanes, they're going to do something. And they've got this thing, objectives, establish a safer and more pleasant street network that prioritizes walking and cycling for all groups and ages and seeks to minimize air pollution. I'm like, oh, cool, that sounds good. So it's like a small local, like, they've got this certain like boundary that in theory they should be able to kind of do things that they want. And then their answer after like, I think like 4 or 5 years of consultation and mucking about and having this document made, their solution to that objective, literally the only solution, is in principle to support proposals that provide cycle parking somewhere, and for residents of council houses they get somewhere to put their bikes. That's their solution to minimize air pollution and make a more pleasant street network for cyclists. I'm like, because literally like the next, just over the boundary of my borough is like this new, like, you know, protected cycle lanes that I can sort of like cross into and all that. And I was like, so I thought, right, I'm going to learn from what I've learned from doing the podcast. And when Sharon says, don't shout at people and don't get angry and don't get all high mic. So I went on Nextdoor and I wrote a big post and said, look, I came across this. Does anyone have any, like, how has anyone else had a look at this document? And is anyone else kind of startled by the disconnect between the objectives and the actual policies that have come out of it? Like, it seems like they're not even doing the bare minimum, and like, is there anyone else that wants to talk about how this thing? So I was like, I suddenly got this feeling like, God, what if I could actually, because we are in this weird little Bermuda Triangle of lack of sort of progress where we are, like all the surrounding areas are like really nice, and then ours is this weird little black hole of like abandoned shop fronts, and like, it's, even though it's nice, it could be a really nice area, but like something weird is going on. But I started picturing myself as like a little, maybe I could like spur some people and start talking at some of these things, but there's been a bit of a disappointing response on Nextdoor, unfortunately. But I did start to think, like, if I could, like, I don't have to solve Brexit, but maybe I could like have an impact on some of the problems of this area, and at least share people a couple of good YouTube videos that are funny about like why drivers should want more cycle lanes, and why how to create beautiful architecture in an area. There's a really good school, because another one was like, we are going to resist the changing of public spaces into community spaces into private developments, unless it can be shown that people really want it to be a community space still. It's like really like pathetic language. But I'm sort of picturing myself as maybe being able to make some time to actually start to, like, I don't know, start writing to those people, and maybe there's some people that I can actually communicate with. So that's anyway, that's I don't know if that relates to anything, but I just want.
I think it does. I mean, Brighton. That's what happens. You give people sovereignty. Don't always use it properly. I mean, Brighton. They've ripped out one lot of cycle lanes.
Why?
I don't really know. I think people who drive cars have objected. There's a particular road that has It's like, it's like my somebody I know who works a lot in transport in Brighton. It's like it's all very hippie until you try and charge people for parking, or try and put something in place that encourages them onto public transport and out of cars, and then suddenly everyone forgets that they're supposed to be,
Let's weave this in to the subject before we like. And I think the problem with that is that people are telling themselves the wrong story, and they're being told the wrong story, and we have it within our power to create a story that what I would love to do is start to help people see things a different way locally, and sort of like see a story that is actually going to help move things forwards, instead of like resulting in some sort of sovereign like local council that is literally having a referendum on whether to, in principle, put some fucking bike racks in somewhere. Like, because they are so mired in indecision that they are completely stuck for some reason. Because the stories are just, I don't know. If you could maybe fix the stories, maybe some of this stuff could move forward. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
Change it from sovereignty. Let's call that let's press the thing. Thank you for listening. That is if you like the podcast, go to grandpodcast.com. And if you want to follow, where can people find you on the internet, Ivanka?
People can find me at Ivanka on Twitter.
I'm trying to point at her underlay thing, but so news on the podcast. There's also a Patreon, blah blah blah. But we had a little bit of a chat about the podcast, and we thought we're gonna like start splitting our time between this podcast and another podcast idea. This is something probably quite soon, but I've been learning a lot so much recently about how sort of the more very specific niche you can be when you're doing a thing like this, probably the more likely people are to find you, and realizing that probably having a podcast where the subjects are things like war and life and people, we're not going to be coming up at the top of anyone's search results unless we get really, really, really lucky and some famous person really, really, really likes us. So we're gonna be alternating between the grand podcast and a sort of very specific podcast, and the working title is Make Better Apps Podcast. And we're just going to talk about some subjects around, so Ivanka's going to bring her supremacy of user research expertise, and I'm going to bring my the fact that I build in stuff all the time, and we're just going to talk on different subjects on like how people can like improve their apps, basically, and how we've done it, and so things like and I want to pick Ivanka's brain, because I keep starting these user interviews and I don't know what to say to start the conversation, and I like that's like just 101 things, but then we'll talk about. There'll be, I've got a big list of subjects. Well, just that. So it probably some people that are listening, we know from work. So like, hopefully you'll still be up for it. But I'm sort of conscious that obviously this is not everyone who's listening is building apps. But it's just we just want to try and do something. Everything we've learned from talking, producing this podcast, actually trying to apply it to something that has some hope of like growing, and then maybe people will kind of filter back into this one afterwards if they decide they like us, or if not. But just to try and maybe actually do a bit, give something a slightly better chance of finding a place, because we're 183 episodes in, and we like it. It'd be nice if
we enjoy doing it. I think
to
go to your point of acting local, I think what our conversation was about as well is taking the skills we have that could make lots of things better, the actual expertise we have in the sphere that we have skills and expertise, actually having an influence there, rather than we enjoy gossiping about Dominic Cummings, but who cares what we think about Dominic Cummings? I do.
Whereas when it comes to like making software and making it better, I think like, Ben said this, like, there's not many people that are sort of in a better position to talk about this than we are. So hopefully,
Well, thank you, Ben.
Thanks. I think we've got a lot of value to offer on that. So it's not going anywhere. This podcast isn't going anywhere, and maybe we did both. Who knows? But there will be a little bit of I've got to get a new website up and running and all that kind of thing. But that's in the works. So if these start to be sort of every other week or every 2 against 1 or whatever, then don't be too surprised. But we'll still be podcasting every week. It's just going to get a bit more specific.
Maybe these ones will get a little bit, these might improve, more focused, because we'll have saved up all the things that aren't relevant to the other podcasts.
Exactly.
Right. Now, let me tell you what I really think.
But yeah, so cool. That's us. So we'll thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Now we do it down
to really concentrate then.
Right, no, here we go. And the ending.